COVID-19 hasn't just arrived as one virus, but in waves with successive variants. Omicron was the latest and most virulent, but now yet another strain is making its way into our midst. With us now to explain, let's welcome in Guelph, Ontario, T. Ryan Gregory, evolutionary biologist, professor and chair of the Department of Integrative Biology at the University of Guelph. And we are delighted to welcome you to our airwaves. Ryan, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Okay, let's start off with the latest strain, as it's called, BA, I don't know, is it .2 or .2, or how do you describe it?
I've been saying BA.2, but you're probably going to be able to be understood whichever one you use.
Okay, what is it?
It is a subvariant, it's actually being called, of the Omicron variant. So the one that we are most accustomed to was BA.1. And these are divergent, they're related, but they're actually quite different genetically. And BA.2 is the one that is now increasing in frequency in various parts of the world, and including in parts in North America where it's gaining traction.
What makes it a subvariant as opposed to its own thing?
Well, this is something that I think we wonder about, and maybe best put to those who make the designation. But there are certainly enough differences in BA.1 versus BA.2 that in some ways it could be given its own designation. I've actually been pretty interested in what the consequence would be if it had its own name. So we tend to think of it all as Omicron, BA.1, BA.2 as all subvariants of Omicron. And so we talk about a prolonging of the Omicron wave, for example. But if this had its own designation, the next would be Pi, or because everyone loves Pi, they might skip to Rho. If it had its own name and we were talking about the Pi wave rather than a prolonging of the Omicron wave, would we think about it differently? It's, I believe the kinds of criteria that are used have to do with the specific biology of the variants, and it is similar to BA.1 in that regard, but genetically it's quite distinct.
In what way?
So what we do from an evolutionary standpoint is make use of the genome sequence data. And one particularly fascinating aspect of this pandemic is we have the accumulation of large amounts of genomic data basically coming in real time, which we haven't had in past pandemics, obviously. And that lets us track the genetic divergences of different lineages within the overall SARS-CoV-2 viral group. And in the case of Omicron, unlike in some of the other variants of concern that we've seen, there's a fairly deep divergence, meaning that there's a large number of mutations that separate the sequence of BA.1 and BA.2. Some have argued that it is about as different, BA.1 and BA.2 are about as different from each other as some of the other variants of concern were from each other. So it could warrant its own designation on a genetic divergence kind of basis.
In terms of the symptoms you will experience, though, does it manifest differently?
I think what we're finding out with SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, this pandemic, is we don't really know exactly how it's going to manifest in different people, different age groups, and also with different variants. So we keep hearing of new and changing symptoms. Sometimes they are fairly consistent. So for example, you might have runny nose, or you might have flu-like symptoms. In other cases, for example, with Omicron and BA.2, we're not hearing about symptoms like loss of taste and smell. The same, you may recall at the beginning of the pandemic, that was sort of a big indicator, was loss of taste and smell. That seems not to be the case as much now. More recently, I've seen reports of gastrointestinal impacts of infection that may be indicative of BA.2 and might be misinterpreted as something else when in fact it is a BA.2 infection. So it seems to be a changing landscape. And one thing we do know about this particular virus is that although it's transmitted through respiratory mechanisms, it affects a large number of systems in the body. And so that can manifest in different ways, as I say, in different people, and depending on the variant. So it's hard to say what exactly is going to be the suite of symptoms in any particular variant.
Okay, I'm going to confess here, this is a pretty nerdy follow-up question, but the acronyms kind of fascinate me here. COVID, of course, coronavirus disease, SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
BA, what's that stand for?
I'm not actually sure how they designate these, and these get used in different sources will use different designations. So there's one of the genome databases uses very different designations. So it's 21L and 21K, and so on. And so that's one I would have to defer to the virologists and the experts at the World Health Organization on how they're actually coming up with all these different names.
Do you think they do it just to confuse us?
No, I don't think so. I think it's the best attempt to try and keep track of a very rapidly evolving virus that is diversifying extremely rapidly, and that comes in these successive waves of new variants. So I think just trying to keep track of that, there aren't enough letters in the alphabet to cover every single potential variant.
Even if you use English and Greek. Anyway, I was going to say, even if you go English and Greek, but I'm getting way off the path here, so let me get back on the path. We're having great debate in the province these days about whether or not we're taking off the protocols too quickly before we ought to be. Obviously, some people want us to try to get back to quote unquote normal right away. Others say no, with March break and so on, we shouldn't be doing this yet. We should wait a while before mask mandates go, et cetera, et cetera. I want to get your sense about how concerned you are about the restrictions being removed as we are suddenly encountering this new subvariant.
Well, I think what we've seen through probably 5, maybe into the 6th wave now, is that an overly optimistic decision on removing protections, and I actually prefer the term protections than restrictions. Removal of those protections is not always the wisest thing to do just because cases are coming down or hospitalizations are coming down. The nature of a pandemic that comes in waves is that it can go back up. And so sometimes we seem to look at numbers and say, okay, so the case rates are falling, let's remove those protections, get back to quote normal, and then we see a subsequent wave coming. So in the case of Omicron, we had what many described as initially projected to be a mild variant. I don't think that's been borne out. It's certainly not in the overall impacts on hospitalizations and deaths and so on around the world. And it ran rampant. And so what we're seeing is that the cases, hospitalizations, and so on are coming down, but they're essentially still quite high relative to where we've been at previous points in the pandemic. So we've kind of adjusted our expectation for what's an okay level of hospitalization or case rates. We're also starting to see examples of wastewater signal is increasing across parts of the province. We're seeing other worrying signs about the increase in the frequency of BA.2 over BA.1, and we've seen in Europe and other places where that has led to major upticks in case rates and hospitalizations again. So I would be wary of just looking at numbers of cases or hospitalizations and taking a downward trend, even to a fairly low level relative to the peak, as the right time to start removing restrictions or protections, as I say. Mm-hmm. The other thing to bear in mind is we are setting up conditions for future variants to evolve while we still have widespread circulation of the virus. So this is, as I said, a virus that is evolving quite rapidly. It's got a very high mutation rate. It diversifies quickly. Many of the mutations that we see in the Omicron variant and subvariants relate specifically to the spike protein, which is involved in its ability to invade cells. So it is evolving very quickly, and new variants can take various forms, can have different symptoms, as we talked about, have different transmission rates, different severities, and it's somewhat unpredictable. But what we do know is if you have a lot of viruses out there circulating and replicating, lots of copies being made, lots of errors will be made, and that's where you get new variants, is through these errors in copying of the virus. So the more you have out there, the more it's being transmitted, the more easily it can find new hosts, the more likely you are to get additional variants evolving and spreading.
No, I take your point on all that, but to be sure, there are places in the world right now where this is really out of control. The numbers out of Hong Kong, for example, are absolutely frightening. But I just want to clarify, would you agree that in the province of Ontario, at least under Omicron, regardless of variant and subvariant, this one's a lot less fatal than its predecessors? That's fair to say, isn't it?
So there's two really important aspects to the impacts of a virus. So one is the transmissibility, that is how easily it moves from one host to another. There's various components that can go into that. So mode of transmission, is it transmitted in smaller aerosolized particles that linger in the air longer? Does it move a longer distance? Are there higher numbers of copies of the virus in the lungs of an infected person such that they're transmitting more copies out into the environment? Is it better at getting into the respiratory tract and attacking cells within a new host, and so on? So transmissibility is essentially the capacity of a variant or strain, if you will, to move from one host to the next. Virulence is a measure of basically how much damage it does to the host once they're infected. And Omicron was discussed primarily in terms of mildness with regard to its severity or its virulence, so that on a per infection basis, the idea was that it was doing less damage to hosts. So you were less likely to end up in the hospital, less likely to suffer severe respiratory symptoms and so on with an Omicron infection than, say, with Delta, which was particularly damaging. However, Omicron had much higher transmission rates. And you can have, at the level of the entire population, much more severe outcomes if the transmission rate swamps out a lower per case virulence. So if you've got a lot more cases out there, even if they're individually likely to be less severe, they just get swamped out by the sheer numbers. And so we did see very high levels of hospitalization, including in some demographics where we hadn't seen it before, in younger age groups and so on under Omicron. And you're seeing some of that happening elsewhere around the world too. So mild relative to Delta, it may be. However, transmissibility is much higher, and that can translate into pretty serious impacts on the medical system, on number of hospitalizations and so on. The other thing is that it's difficult in some ways to say whether a particular variant is less virulent or more mild on infection when other things have changed. So, for example, we have in Ontario and in various parts of the world quite good vaccination coverage, at least with 2 doses.
Yes.
It does look like Omicron has had the capacity to undergo what are called breakthrough infections, so basically getting around immunity. It also seems that BA.2 can reinfect, and potentially including people who have had BA.1. So reinfection would also change that dynamic. But we have a population now that is much more protected than it was, say, under Delta or some of the previous variants. And so is it actually less damaging on a per infection basis if you were to compare Omicron with original strain that we saw basically spreading around in early 2020? Would it be less virulent on that level? I don't know that that's clear, but it's had a smaller impact on a per infection basis, in part because there's been vaccination. We have better treatment options and detection options and all that sort of stuff. So we're able to mitigate the severe impacts better, even if transmissibility is higher.
Well, let me see if I can just sort of follow the thread here of this next question, because, 90% of us in this province have had one shot. And of course, that one shot was not specifically designed with BA.2 in mind, or BA.1, or Omicron at all, actually. And kids, the youngest kids among us, have not been required at any point to get a shot yet. I guess I'm wondering now, particularly with the mask mandates off, are we going to see a spike in cases because of all of that among the youngest among us?
Well, so we should probably be clear that last I looked, the 6 to 11-year-olds were somewhere around 50% vaccinated, and they have access to those vaccines. Under 5 still can't get vaccinated. So right. We still have a significantly unprotected group based on age in that regard. We also know that the immunity that was provided by 2 doses is waning, and that the Omicron variant is capable of breakthrough infections and reinfections, as I said. So what 2 doses, and better yet 3 doses with a booster, does is provides reasonable protection against severe impacts. It doesn't necessarily stop the transmissibility. So overall, though, it does seem that there is an age effect in terms of severity, and it's not generally kids that are getting the most sick from the direct impacts of a COVID infection. So they're not, I don't want to downplay the fact that there are many children ending up in hospitals in Ontario and around the world, but it's not the same level of severity that we see in some of the older groups. But there are still concerns about kids becoming infected, especially when they're not vaccinated. For example, very young kids. So they may have pre-existing conditions. They may have siblings who have pre-existing conditions. They may have parents who are immunocompromised. And if you have school-age children, you'll know that not just COVID, but diseases generally move around from household to household via kids at school. I mean, I don't think I ever got as sick as often as when my son started daycare. So there are these, this trading effect of viruses at places where kids congregate. So it's not just them getting sick. And then the other big piece that seems to be overlooked far more than I think it should is long COVID.
Right.
So this is a virus that infects, the respiratory tract initially, and that's where we tend to think of when we talk about severe acute effects. Are you ending up on a ventilator? Are you ending up in the hospital because you can't breathe? But the way that this virus attacks and infiltrates cells is such that it can access a number of different tissues, and it can have impacts on a number of different systems. So I've heard it described as, it's really more of a vascular disease, or it's an inflammatory disease, or it's a disease that can impact the circulatory system, the heart, blood vessels. It can get into reproductive tissue, the brain. So what I worry about with kids, my own kids included, is a little bit less that they are going to individually become severely ill with the initial infection, but rather that they will be transmitting it to those who have vulnerable members in their family, or that they will be susceptible to long COVID, which is of unknown connection to severity of the original infection and whether you are more likely to get it or less on reinfection and so on. We just don't know. And I think we need to be taking that risk very seriously.
Okay. Ryan, I got 30 seconds left to ask you one more question, which is, as we hopefully inch our way towards some kind of endemic condition of COVID, do you believe it is inevitable that as the variants and subvariants change, they're actually going to become less severe as we move along?
I think that's probably one of the biggest myths about how pathogens evolve, is that they inevitably become less severe. The notion, I think, is that in order to continue being transmitted, they have to be less damaging to hosts. But that's really not necessarily the case. And it's certainly not the case in a virus that can reinfect, that can escape immunity, that has severe symptoms show up significantly later than the transmissibility period. So it's certainly not a guarantee. All pandemics end eventually. This one will as well. It most likely will come to some stable level of infection in the population. We might have things like seasonal vaccination like we do with flu and so on. But it's really important to bear in mind two major things with this. One is there's no guarantee that any particular new variant is going to be less virulent. It will probably be more transmissible because that's how it will spread around the world. But it may or may not be less virulent. That's number one. The other is that endemic doesn't automatically mean harmless or mild. Malaria is endemic in parts of the world. Tuberculosis is endemic in parts of the world. Measles is endemic in parts of the world. And those three diseases together kill about 2 million people a year. So endemic doesn't mean that we don't have to worry about it anymore. It means that we can't essentially get rid of it, and it persists in a relatively stable frequency in the population. So how do you live with COVID? It's not by doing nothing. It's by improving ventilation. It's by wearing masks if you're feeling ill. It's by getting vaccination rates up and having more tailored vaccination rates. And honestly, it's vaccine equity around the world. So where we're seeing new variants arise is where there's high transmission rates. Where there's high transmission and infection rates is where vaccination has not been at the same level. And that's in many ways due to access. So we really need to take this as a global problem. We really need to look at equity vaccination. We need to look at long-term mitigation strategies. And frankly, if we improve ventilation and filtration in buildings, that's going to be good for a number of different things.
Boy, I was really hoping you'd leave this on a more uplifting note, but I guess I should thank you and appreciate that you're keeping it real here. So, T. Ryan Gregory, University of Guelph, we're grateful for your time tonight on TVO. Many thanks.
My pleasure.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.